Hi, everyone. Hi. Look around. Look at your Sangha. Maybe say hi if you'd like to. And if you don't, just keep your eyes closed and your mouth shut. Say a little highs. Yeah. It's always nice to be in Sangha. And if you're on Zoom, you can just look at each other. Ooh. I always like to lean in. Yeah, what a beautiful gift. Thank you, Tina. This Bodhi tree, it's actually, it's related to the tree that the Buddha was enlightened under. And it's a ficus tree. I think it's like Ficus religiosa or something like that. And if you look at the leaves, you'll notice it. It's that this shape is used in a lot of Buddhist as representations of the Buddha. So it's a really beautiful ancestor related to that tree. So yeah, thank you. That's incredibly special, and it'll grow big and tall like a ficus. So I like to start off with some chanting. So sometimes we chant this chant, Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhasa, which is really an homage to the Buddha. And it can be an homage to the Buddha, the teacher. But really, Buddha just means awake. And sometimes I like to call Buddhism awakeism. That's really what it's all about. The Buddha was never really pointed to himself. He was always pointing to us and our wakeful nature. And so when we pay homage to the Buddha, we're just really paying homage to this wakeful nature within ourselves, this potential that we all have to wake up. That sounds pretty good, right? All right. So I'm just going to chant it. And if you'd like to join in, you can. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. And we'll settle into some meditation time. So feel free to kind of sway, shrug your shoulders, move the head, shake a little bit. Even looking around the room again, just to kind of orient yourself, even if you're at home, that's really nice to do. To feel, sense, become comfortable in your space. Eyes can be open or closed, whatever works for you. And a few nice long breaths just to settle with an emphasis on that exhale. And as you exhale, you can feel this sort of pull of gravity, this embrace of gravity, this downward motion. Their attention kind of moves downward into the body, out of the head. And then our spine is sort of loosely straight. So I like to feel like, always pretend there's like a single thread, like pulling up on the crown of the head. So it's not like a militaristic lift, it's just a slight lift. And so there's these two directions, grounding, lifting. Collarbones can slightly lift as the shoulders draw down with gravity. And we're just open to what's here now. So in our practice, it's really important that we don't attempt to curate a particular experience. Rather, we're just with what's here. And so how does the body feel? What's the current condition of the mind? And our job as meditators is just to be aware of whatever's here. Something we use to stabilize ourselves is typically the breath. So we can just be with the simple in and out of the breath. We can feel as we breathe just the nourishment of the inhale and this cleansing quality of the exhale. Really, the breath is just a reference point that just keeps us present. Our awareness can go much broader. The goal is not to stop thinking or to stop thought in any way. Our goal is just to be aware, to know, to be with whatever arises in our experience. inevitably will get pulled by something, thought or something in the room. Perfectly okay. We're just aware of it. That's it. last few minutes of our meditation, if you'd like, you can bring some attention to the heart. Just noticing the kindness that's here within. I know there's kindness here because you're here. Something brought you here. Something within you wants to be free. Just connecting with that kindness. And perhaps allowing it to spread through the body. If you'd like to, feel free to stay inward. If you'd like to, you can share this kindness outward in all directions or to somebody in particular. You know, maybe the people sitting next to you or in your house. Or you can bring the attention back in to the breath, the body, the ground, the room. And a secret teaching, it's rarely taught. Just slightly turning the corners of the mouth up. Buddha smile. So if you don't mind, I'm ringing the bell. All right. Thank you all so much. It was really uh, beautiful, quiet. Thank you. At least externally. I know in here is not always so quiet, but it felt really nice in the room. So we'll take a little break here, and we'll keep this room silent. So if people want to continue sitting, and we'll try to keep that door closed. But if you'd like to talk and be in community, you can do so out there in the lobby or the tea room or the library or something. And we'll come back at 1:45, so about 9 minutes. Yeah, thank you. it back there. Okay, still waiting on a few here. Do you all like the secret teaching? It helps if you're ever meditating to smile. It really does. Kind of breaks things up. And oh, you can't. Oh, you need me up more. You can't hear me. Could maybe I can move it in. Can you turn me up a little bit? Steph? How's that? Is that better? No? Hello?
Is that any better?
Hello? Check, check. Hello, hello. Can you, is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. I'm talking louder. Yeah, meditation voice, is a thing. Yeah, sorry about that. I didn't say anything that important in the meditation. Probably better if you didn't hear me. All right. Well, I'm so happy that you're here. Tonight, we're going to talk about something that I enjoy talking about a lot, and I might ask for some input from you. And I'm here next week as well, so this might turn into a two-parter, just because there's a lot here. So I'll try to cut myself off for some questions at the end, maybe with a little cliffhanger or something. I don't know. We'll see. Um, so I want to start with a little story that uh, the story that the Buddha told to a king, and the king was named Pasenadi, King Pasenadi. And King Pasenadi comes to the Buddha in the middle of kind of, just a regular day, one of his royal days where he's running a kingdom, and um, one of those things where you have more to do than there are hours in the day. I'm sure a lot of us have experienced that before. And the Buddha, instead of asking him what business he had, he just starts to go into this story. He poses this, kind of a strange question. He says, suppose, he says, a person you completely trusted came riding in from the east and told you, Your Majesty, there's a mountain high as the clouds, and it's rolling toward us from the east. And it says it's crushing every living thing in its path. And while you're taking that in, a second trusted person rides from the west with the same report. A mountain is rolling in from the west, and then one from the north, and then one from the south. Four mountains as high as the sky, all coming right at you from all directions. And he says, What would you do? What would you do if that happened? Kind of a strange question, right? And so it's destroying everything, all four of these mountains coming in. destroying everything, and it's coming right at you. What would you do? And Pasenadi, who's not, uh, who's a smart person, um, he says, "What else could I do but live by the Dharma? Do good and make what goodness I can with the time there is." And then the Buddha says, "I'll tell you, great king, aging and death are rolling in exactly like that. They're already on the move. They're coming. Since that's so, what should you do but live by the Dharma?" I love that he tells this to a king. The Buddha was very bold, kind of met people, where they were, whether they were a mother who just lost a child or a king or whoever he met them where they were. And so this is a king. It's not a monk who's, already given everything up. They've already kind of released their material lives. They don't live by that anymore. But this king is a powerful person, who has lots of land, and he's in the middle of his life, and the Buddha asks him this question. And I love this because this is a story about all of us too. We're all busy. A lot of us are very, very busy, and some of us don't have time to practice. Don't have time to practice, and it can get rather difficult. And it's interesting, what the mountains are doing in this story, because they're not like some sort of punishment. It's not something that's, because of this, the mountains are coming. It's just, it's not the Buddha like, you need to, you should do this thing. It's just true. It's just the way it is for all of us, you know, aging. If we're lucky, we'll get old, um, and we die, and we get sick. All these things happen. And nothing that the king has, none of the armies or the treasures, the influence, none of it can do anything about these mountains that are coming in. The only things that make sense to him at all is practice. So practicing the Dharma to create goodness here and now, to be kind, to create conditions for goodness to continue until the mountains finally come in. And that might seem odd, that might seem odd. Shouldn't we just have a good time? But does that really last? Does that really um, feel good? Feels good momentarily. It feels good for a short period of time. But what sustains us? What kind of really deep down do we feel good about? What's actually beneficial for us and for those around us? And so this feeling in the Dharma and the Pali word is called samvega, and it's usually translated as urgency. I read one translation that was spiritual shock, which I found kind of funny. But I don't like those words very much because they kind of sound grim or like anxiety inducing. Like I've got to hurry up and do this thing before this thing happens. And that's not really what it's talking about. Samvega is kind of this feeling where you recognize the preciousness and the passing of your life kind of at the same time. Are any of you familiar with that feeling? Yeah. Like it's like in the body, before the mind can create a story out of it. It's like, this preciousness and the limit, the limit to it. And I love that Pasenadi, he doesn't collapse underneath it. It doesn't, I mean, at least in the story, he has an answer kind of right away. It's like, obviously it was already, some kind of practitioner or something. And so the mountains are coming, they show up, and he knows immediately what to do. He knows immediately how to answer this. And that clarity is another word. I'm going to bring up some words and some suttas tonight. So get ready. That clarity is this word called pasada, which is kind of like this calm confidence that there's a way to meet the challenge. When you're prepared. Probably felt that too. When you know there's a challenge coming, but you feel like you have the tools and the resources to meet it. Yeah. And so pasada and samvega kind of come together. And so the samvega opens our eyes, and then the pasada moves us forward with some modicum of confidence. So this is the question for tonight. If the mountains are real and Pasenadi is right that the only thing with any answer in it is how we live, how we act, how we practice, then everything kind of comes down to what we're actually doing with this life. Which brings us to a word that's easy to get wrong: karma. Karma. I'm sure all of you have heard of the word karma. And so karma made its way into pop culture a long, long time ago, right? And it's a really interesting word. And I'm curious how some of you might define it. So you can kind of do popcorn. If anybody has a definition, you don't have to get a mic, I'll repeat it. If anybody has their own definition of karma here or online. Consequences, causes and conditions, yes. Action, you're smart. Yeah. Any others? Cause and effect, yeah, great, cool. So sort of the kind of popular, kind of pop culture way of talking about karma is it's sort of like this cosmic, like scorekeeping in a way. Um, like there's a notebook somewhere with, like our names on it, and there's two columns, and one side is good and one side is bad, and they kind of have to make a balance at some point, you know? And that's not it at all. That's not it at all. What goes around comes around. We've all heard of that. And some of us can kind of, maybe unbeknownst to us, live by this sort of definition. Um, and it's not entirely wrong. There's a little bit of truth in it. The problem is that the way karma is talked about, it's kind of this abstract thing that's separate from us that we really don't have a whole lot of control over. You know, that it's out there somewhere. That it happens to us from somewhere else. I heard somebody once say that if there was a god in Buddhism, it would be karma, which I think is kind of wrong, but I thought that was interesting. And the Buddha himself did something quite different with the word. So the word at his time meant something completely different. Um, Karma in the Buddhist time and the Vedic time, karma meant ritual action. So things that happen in an actual ritual, particularly uh, connected to sacrifice. So in the Vedic times, you'd make a sacrifice to kind of atone for particular things, which is a very common thing in most religions. But this is what the Buddha was what came up in this belief. And it really had to do with like the correct, or the really precise performance of the ritual. Like you couldn't get anything in that ritual wrong. So it was like this very precise thing. And if you got it wrong in some way, then that would kind of count against you. Um, and so the Brahmins, the highest caste, kind of controlled all of this whole system, and they were kind of the judges of the good and bad. And because of that, it kind of that resulted in your fortune or misfortune. Because the Brahmins could dictate and judge, how you were doing these particular things. Just kind of messed up. So karma was kind of this thing that you paid specialists to do on your behalf. It's not so different from like indulgences in the Catholic Church. Uh, but the Buddha, as he did, redefined this word from an institution to something that's very personal. And you see the Buddha doing this often. He took a lot of words from the Vedas or the culture and redefined them. Dharma is one of those words. Noble is another word. It's all through the Dharma how he did this, and it was for a really particular purpose because he saw these cultures as being oppressive and hierarchical. And one of the things he attempted to do in his life, and I think pretty successfully, was to kind of break those things down, break some of these unjust systems down. And so the way the Buddha defined it, there's a line in one of the suttas where he says, intention practitioners is what I call karma. Intention practitioners is what I call karma. Having intended, one acts. I think is pretty interesting. So that's it. That's the change. So it's not about doing something precise or exact. It's about the intention behind what you're doing. So it's no longer it was no longer this ritual you perform, or this like sentence handed down from the past. It was you know what you're intending right now in this moment is what matters. So I like to think of it as like the direction of the heart, or the leaning of the heart, or how we meet what's directly in front of us right here and right now. And so the Buddha's teaching was like radically present in response to what's happening right here and right now. And I find this really interesting. So if karma is intention, then karma isn't waiting for you somewhere to kind of, you know, in the future to get even. What comes around goes around. It's not like that. It's happening instantly, like in the next thing you think, and the next thing you do. Yeah. So we're doing karma right now, you know, and listening and me speaking. There's an intention in the way we're kind of receiving this moment right now. There can be curiosity or resistance or a little of both. And each one of those things will have different results. Yeah. The Buddha called karma one of the imponderables. So we can, his recommendation was to not think about it too much, but to just know these sort of things, that what we intend is our karma. So we're always practicing something. So we're always making skillful or unskillful choices. We're either asleep or awake to what we're doing. And it's kind of what I was saying in the meditation that you couldn't hear. was that was that our job really isn't to stop thoughts, and it's not to stop thinking. It's just to be aware. Like the intention is just awareness, to be aware of what's happening. Because we can't really control a lot of what's happening in our minds and our hearts. And so we become aware of them, and that in and of itself, you know, there are particular results from that. And so we're always practicing something. And so the only question is what? What are we practicing moment to moment to moment to moment? And so how does this work? And what did the Buddha mean by this? And how does intention kind of shape our lives? And the Buddha gave a kind of talked about the mechanism of it. And he gives this story um, about his own mind before he woke up, um, when he was still a seeker, kind of figuring things out. And he gave this teaching on, called it two kinds of thought. This is pretty simple, but I think it's very profound. He describes watching his own thinking and sorting it into two piles. I love this, like practicalness of the Buddha sometimes. So on one side, thoughts of sensual craving, ill will, cruelty, and then on the other, thoughts of renunciation, of goodwill, and of harmlessness. Yeah. And then he notices something. He says, whatever one frequently thinks and ponders upon, that becomes the inclination of the mind. Probably heard that before. And that's where that comes from this teaching. Whatever one frequently thinks and ponders upon, that becomes the inclination of the mind. If he dwelt on thoughts of ill will or hatred, his mind kind of sloped towards ill will. Yeah. It got easier to be hateful. Uh, that groove, that pattern deepened through repetition, through repetition. And when he turned his attention to the other way, toward goodwill, towards letting go, the mind started to slope in that direction instead. So the inclination followed the attention. Yeah. Kind of like water finds, particular channels. That's karma. It's kind of that simple, though it's not that simple, but on a practical level, it really is that simple. And so it's like this whole engine of it. It's described from the inside. It's not like a metaphysics that we have to believe. It's something we can check in on right now. What is my attitude right now in our own experience? You know, where does my mind lean? You know, my family, we have this, not so much me anymore, this really cynical bent. And so I had this very cynical, deep channel. And so everything was seen through a critical lens or a cynical lens. And after practicing for a while, I saw just how much pain that was causing and how there was a karma coming from that. And that it wasn't something that was fixed, that it could actually change. And that the more I started to turn my heart and mind towards metta or compassion or care and kindness, then those grooves started to deepen. And then that cynical edge started to kind of go away, right? I don't really have it so much anymore, at all. I could have just continued with it and said, no, that's just the way I am. And that karma would have just continued and continued and continued. And it doesn't feel good. Maybe it does instantly, like for a little bit, but it doesn't last. And so we can think about a mood we've fed recently, uh, like a grievance that we've kept going, or you know, or a gratitude that you felt in something. Yeah. And so, what we kind of rehearsed yesterday kind of carries over into the next day in a little bit of a deeper groove, whether it's positive or negative. It doesn't matter, that's just the kind of the mechanics of things. And so the mind that we woke up with today, we had a hand in shaping that in a sense. And we've all experienced this. That's just how the mind kind of works. Always think of it like, learning an instrument or learning to juggle or something like that. The groove gets deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper the more you spend time with it. And so the brain is always adapting to our activities, the activities that we choose. The Dhammapada, which is one of the early, it's believed to be one of the really early teachings of the Buddha, the first verse in the whole thing, it says, all experience is preceded by mind, led by mind, made by mind. Speak or act with a corrupted mind, and suffering follows, as the wagon wheel follows the hoof of an ox. All experience is preceded by mind, led by mind, made by mind. Speak or act with a peaceful mind, and happiness follows, like a never departing shadow. Very sweet. And so this describes two different ways of moving through life. Yeah. And both of them are made from what came before it. Yeah. The mind, in the mind. And so this can sound like a very heavy teaching and, like be careful what you think, because it's all being recorded and, it's the wheels coming for you and, you know, and I don't want to leave that impression. And because plenty of us kind of lead, with karma in that way, like a sort of dread. Um, but it's not like that at all. And this leads to another teaching that is maybe one of my top 5 teachings of the Buddha. I just really like this image because this is really how I like seeing practice. Um, and so there's this teaching. It's called the salt crystal. And the Buddha says when you drop a lump of salt into a small cup of water, what happens? The the whole cup is spoiled. You can't drink it. You know? But if you take that same lump of salt and you drop it into the Ganges, into the great river, what happens? It disappears, nothing. You would never taste it at all. So the river is just much too vast to be troubled by that lump of salt. The small cup is, but the river is not. The same salt, same action, completely different result. Yeah. So the difference is in the size of what receives the salt. And so then he makes this point. The salt is the deed, the action, the stimulus. And then the water is the heart. A cramped, small, untrained heart, it takes an ordinary difficulty and is overwhelmed by it. You know, a heart that's been cultivated through practice, made spacious, made steady, meets that very same difficulty and has room for it. The salt is still salt. Life still delivers what it delivers. but the mind receives it, that receives it has grown large enough to hold it without being overtaken. And this is what practice is. We're creating a capacity of heart and mind so that we can hold difficulty, so we can hold more, so that we're not thrown off or overtaken by the small things. And when we're tired or frustrated or really hungry, and our mind's really small, and so the slightest things can throw us off. So we still kind of contract and expand. And then when we're really relaxed, those small things don't affect us as much. And so there's this expansive quality that we're growing through our practice. And so this is why practice is so important. This is what we do here. This is what the Buddha taught. If karma was this fixed thing with this like sentence, and its outcome was already stamped, then there'd be nothing we can do. We just have to succumb to it. Yeah. But the outcome isn't in the salt. Sometimes we think it is. It's not in the salt. It's in the water. Yeah, the water. The water is the one thing we can actually work on. We're going to have difficulties every day. This is part of life. But what we can do is work internally, yeah, to create more space, more capacity, yeah, to receive that difficulty in a different way. So we can widen the vessel. Yeah. And so every hour on the cushion, we're expanding this body of water that our lives get poured into. Now, it is easy to take this too far in the other direction. So I want to caution against this too. So if karma explains so much, then people sometimes slide into explaining everything with it. So, the illness is my karma, the grief is my karma, the hard thing that happened to me, I must have earned it somehow, or I didn't get into this thing that I wanted to get into, that must be my karma. We can start to explain every single thing with that. And that's not, I don't think that's very healthy. I don't think that's a very thing to do. And reading it like that, I think, is pretty cruel. There's a degree of cruelty there, both to ourselves and to others. And the Buddha addressed this too. This a wanderer comes to him and asks, isn't everything a person feels caused what they did in the past? This is a direct question to the Buddha. And the Buddha says no. And he makes this list, like these causes of feeling and things that happen right now. And it actually comes partially from a traditional Ayurvedic diagnosis, which I find really interesting. So he says, some feelings arise from disturbances, bile disorders, which is the first one, which is pitta, if you're familiar with Ayurveda, like an excess or imbalance of pitta. Phlegm disorders, which is an ancient way of saying an imbalance of kapha, if you ever kapha, which is and then wind disorders, an excessive imbalance of vata. And then all three combined is the fourth one. And then he says a change in climate could affect how you feel. Improper care, so careless behavior, uneven habits, or a bad diet, or assault, external injuries, attacks, or stress. And then the other one, the eighth one, is result of karma, past actions. So karma is one of eight of what creates what you feel, all the time. So it's not all karma. It's not all karma. So he names the ripening of karma as one cause amongst many. And then he says, anyone who insists that everything felt is caused by past karma has gone way too far. And he actually calls it wrong view. And so he says, claiming everything a person experiences come from past karma is a mistaken view. And then he notes that people know from personal experience and common sense that things like a sudden change in weather, an injury, or an upset bile balance can make you feel pain without needing to blame past lives. Sometimes things are just the way they are. And I find this very kind, a very kind teaching. You know, your back hurts because you're a body in weather and time. You know, the Buddha's back debilitated him. And I don't see anything in the suttas where he was blaming, you know, a past life or some karma for that. You know, our grief is shaped by our, is a direct result of our love. You know, we grieve as much as we've loved, you know. You know, the hard thing that happened, you know, to you and or the world, you know, has countless causes, most of which had nothing to do with you. And so the karma is changeable. It's like a, you know, a river that we're standing in. And, you know, every intention is water that we're adding, adding to this capacity. So I know I said end early, but I just have another point to make, and I don't want to save it till next week. So what all this means, where this kind of lands, is that, you know, if intention is karma and the mind slopes toward whatever it repeats, then sitting down to be aware, you know, on purpose again and again is the most precise karmic act available to a human being. Yeah. So meditation is karma taken into our own hands. When we sit down and we look at the mind and things become clear to us, then we can direct our intention much more effectively, much more skillfully. Yeah. So Buddha gave us a practice to affect our karma. And so if we think about what we're doing when we sit in meditation, you know, we're choosing moment by moment which way we want to incline the mind. That's what we're doing. Every time a thought arises, we have a choice right there. Yeah. How do we want to incline the mind? You know, our attention wanders into, you know, an old story, a fantasy, a grievance, and you notice, and then you incline it back toward the breath, toward the body, towards metta, towards something that's here, towards something that's skillful. Yeah. And that small movement, that return, is exactly what begins to shift these things. That moment is so important. The moment when we notice in your meditation, you notice your mind starts to lean towards something and you pull it back, that's an awakening moment. That's clarity. That's nibbana. That's a clear seeing into the nature. And then we pull it, we come back. Yeah. That's important. It might feel annoying at the time, but it's like, it's important over and over and over and over again. We do that, and the groove gets deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. Yeah. So we incline towards freedom. Yeah. Away from suffering. That's that's the practice. That's why we practice. So I think it's enough for tonight. A little cliffhanger, but I'll continue this next week. So let's just pause here. May we know and truly understand, the agency we have over our lives. Just through the simple act of sitting down and seeing what's there and inclining towards what is wholesome, what is skillful, and what is conducive to waking up. Thank you so much for your attention. And yeah, I think I have time for a question or a comment or two. We might go a couple minutes long, but yeah. And one thing I do want to say, Thai teacher named Buddhadasa used to say that we experience nibbana all the time, not like a sustained nibbana, but there's these moments of clarity of waking up that we have all the time in our meditation practice. Like again, just that seeing of being caught is a tiny moment of nibbana. Yeah. And then we come back because nibbana is like the cessation of clinging. And so we're clinging to this thing that's pulling us away. We notice that there's a cessation of it. There's a clarity. If you really notice that, highlight it in your meditation practice. Like, whoa. We usually get annoyed, like, oh, there I go again, wandering. Ugh. But it's actually like this flash. And we can really do that secret yoga I taught you. Smile, you can smile about it, and then come back. Yeah. So anyway.
Great. So I've got the microphone so that if anybody wants to make a comment or ask a question in this room, the folks on Zoom can hear us. And if anybody on Zoom wants to raise a hand, please do, and we'll call on you. Yes. Let me start with your name.
I'm Tara. From what I understand, the paying attention is a real key, or noticing. And I have the tendency, when I notice a thought in meditation, that I'm telling myself, ditch it. This doesn't have to be thought about. But from what I understand from you, is like there needs to be a redirection, not just ditching the thought, but changing direction. Is that correct?
Even just noticing, like, you know, sometimes, a thought arises and we're not just thinking the thought, we actually kind of we get absorbed in the thought.
Mm-hmm.
And so even just noticing that we're aware of the thought, to me, is enough, because that does bring you back. You don't have to ditch the thought. And there's certain practices where if we're working on concentration, then like, okay, we're going to put that aside and we're going to come back. If we need to like really bring steadiness into the mind, that's a practice for sure, and a very valuable one. But just for like, really, we're just trying to become aware of what we're getting caught in. So we get caught in a story of planning and we start to plan. There's like an automatic thing there. Like, oh, I'm participating in this thought. What if now I can just be aware that this is there.
Okay. Does that apply to real life too? I mean, I noticed in a yoga class, I compare myself to the other people, like, oh, I'm doing this better. Oh,
Yeah.
Like that. And is there also just the noticing is okay, or do I need to redirect into something?
Yeah, I think when you notice it, like, I don't know, you tell me, like, when you notice you're comparing yourself, do you also notice how ridiculous that is? Yeah. So like it answers itself. Like the awareness of it answers itself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Because we can participate in the comparing and it kind of makes sense, I'm in this class. But then when we become aware of it, not participate in it anymore, Yeah, it kind of loosens on its own, and the wisdom comes forth. Yeah. So that space that's created is replaced with wisdom. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Hi, I'm Gwen. Adam, thank you so much for that story about the mountains coming at you because I've been listening to the news and it's like the inevitable, right? It is coming, the politics, the climate, all that is so big. And this is very helpful. Otherwise, it's a frantic feeling like, what do I do? But you can't do anything but practice the Dharma. Thank you very much for that story.
Yeah. Thank you. Great. Well, we'll just close here. Just pause for a moment. And now we're going over a few minutes, but it's okay, I think. So just pausing here and just feeling here the goodness of just being together and practicing the Dharma, discussing the Dharma. Though there wasn't a lot of discussion tonight, just being in the Dharma with it is very, very beneficial, being in community. And as in all communities, there's always, people in communities that are having difficulty or are experiencing the mountains of death, sickness, the dukkha of life. And so I just want to name some people from our list here, just to bring their names into this space. Jack Lovelace, Joy Scott, Paul Barton, Jordan, Amy Yates, Tyler Eastman, Catherine Bergstaller, Brian Caraway, Sarah Fighter, Steve S., Nancy Leisure, Inez Rojas, Patricia Gradziel, Ted and family, William Richard, Jen Elliott, Sydney, Jeff. And let's open up the space if there's any other names you want to speak into the room. Feel free online as well to unmute, and if you have a name you'd like to speak into the room. Mm. These beings be held in kindness and care and support. May all beings experience the perfect peace. May all beings everywhere, without exception, in all directions, be free from suffering and the conditions of suffering. Thank you all so much for your attention and your practice and for being in Sangha. Thank you, Zoomers. Feel free to unmute and say hi bye. They're right here or back there if you want to wave at them. But yeah, thank you all.
Thank y'all so much. Have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Adam.
you, Adam.
Good
Yeah.
night.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Adam.
Francisco.
Thank
Good
you,
to see you.
Sangha.
Thank you, Barbara. Hey, Rolita. Good to see you. Yeah. Thanks, everybody. All right.